How early? 604 or 204?
Around, well, they vary, but someplace between the first century or the second century and probably the 5th or 6th century. So mostly Greek documents. The point is that if I have 3, how good is it? You know, it's a start, yeah. But if I have 70,
Better.
much better. You know, in the most in antiquity, I mean, we're talking all works. So 24,000,
Oh, gosh, a lot.
right? So you see, that's not too bad. So what's the other test? It's the interval. The interval between the time when the work was written and the earliest manuscript I have. Want to guess what that is in antiquity? The average? Average about 1,000 years. So, for example, of stuff that you Plato 900 years, of Pliny the Younger 850. Pliny's the best, about 850. You know, Aristotle 1,000, Sophocles 1,000. New Testament. Anybody want to guess what the interval for the New Testament is?
6th century.
About 130. That's okay. There are early date scholars that think we have some earlier documents I'll talk about in a second, but in general, most scholars think that we have it's about 130 years. That's the worst case. That's best through the Book of John, because we have a papyrus of the Book of John that is really early date, 2nd century.
That corresponds
1,000 to 130. Round it.
10.
That's factor 10. So, and by the way, okay, that's more than a factor of 10. That's more than a factor of 10. So if I just went with the bibliographical test of the New Testament documents of Matthew, for example, if I'm a historian, which do I choose as better history? Pliny, Plato, or Matthew? Yeah, do I have a choice? No, I don't have a choice, because the tests, these are qualitative tests. These are quantitative tests. They're not qualitative tests. It's not my opinion. Is that my opinion? No. I got 70 documents. I got 70 documents, right? As a matter of fact, does anybody know? And I didn't bring my copy, but does anybody know what we call the text that we do? You know, each of these Matthew documents is different, a little bit different. Some of them include stuff like, for example, the woman caught in adultery is not found in the earliest. We don't know what gospel it comes from. We have no idea. It's in some of the gospels it's found in Matthew, some in Luke, some in John. Take your pick. Most scholars believe that the woman caught in adultery part was added later. It's not part of the gospel. And the reason you find it later is because it was added. So, in the majority text, I gave it away, right? The majority text is where we take these texts and resolve it. And if you look in the majority text, there are footnotes for every difference, for every place where there's something strange or different within the text. And we've resolved them. Now, we don't have that well, we do have that problem, for example, with the same problem with the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the other documents in antiquity and the Jewish people, too. Not quite as bad, but we still have those problems. You don't, for example, have a majority text. There is a Masoretic kind of majority text, but you really don't call it that. But in any case, the point is this. If it passed the bibliographical test, it's passed the first test, and it's considered historical. So the next 2 tests, and they were mentioned already, what are they called? Internal. The internal test, let's see, 2 and 3. Internal and external. Anybody want to guess what the internal test is?
When you compare the two, are there differences between the two?
Not really. We do the internal test on the majority text, so on the combined text. So we've already gone through that step of saying, okay, comparing the text. And all we're doing in comparing the text is saying what words do we find here, what words do we find there. Because generally, it doesn't change the meaning, it doesn't change. What you see is different tenses, different means of spelling, you know, etc. So, you know, when we think different text, we're not talking about, you know, there's a whole new ad here, or it's just that some, you know, maybe a name is spelled a little bit differently. Because remember, did they have dictionaries?
No.
No, you had to wait till Samuel Johnson to get your own dictionaries, and that's way out, you know, 17th century. So, you know, basically we're talking no dictionaries, so that's what you're going to find in manuscripts is different spellings, different, you know, and by the way, there's no punctuation, right?
Right.
No punctuation, no caps, no paragraphs, no,
Right.
see?
They had run-on sentences.
Well, everything's a run-on sentence, right?
Yeah,
Because they didn't have sentences.
run-on.
So, in any case, and by the way, remember what I told you before. So these were delivered by people. Remember?
Yeah.
So hopefully the person, you know, that's why you might find a different, you know, a little different spelling, a little different grammar used, you know, maybe a different tense. You see that? Because they've memorized it, right? And so when they're writing it down, part of it's from memory. So that's why you find it delicious. So anyway, we worked out those documentational issues. So what would we be looking for in the internal test?
Which is inside the, inside?
Well, we don't think much about this, but those who write like I write think about it a lot. When you're writing a book or a novel, what do you want it to be? For example, your main character, do they have the same character at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, except for whatever might be some change? You know, you always have a change in your main character, right? But is your main character the same at the beginning as they are at the end, except for that singular change or that change? You see what my point is?
Yeah.
You know, someone might have a redemptive experience, and so you have a change. But okay, let's pick the bad character, the antagonist in the book. Should have the same character throughout, right? In general, the characters don't change. How about their bedroom? Unless they redesign their bedroom, it should be the same at the beginning as the end, right? If it isn't, then something's gone haywire in your novel. So we don't think about this much because in English, we assume everyone writes pretty cohesively. But in the ancient world, that wasn't true. So we look internally to see if the document itself is cohesive. A lot of religious documents in the ancient world are not cohesive. They're, well,
A compilation.
the Book of the Dead, for example. Hymns to be used by dead people. And how do you know they work? Right? Spells to be used by dead people. How do you know they work? The Book of the Dead. Well, do you see that as an internal issue? And if you find one spell that's different than another spell in the same book, well, when you're dead, you better pick the right one. Okay? You see my point? So, for example, internally we saw that Jesus, for example, used one kind of language in the Greek in one sense and another language in another sense. Or if he said things that were contradictory, you see, that would be an internal proof text. And so, especially in Greek, that's why, you really can't see it in English as well as you can see it in Greek. So you look at the Greek to see if there's an internal contradictions. And, in the English translations, you can tell this too pretty well, but, Greek is the main thing. But the point is, do you really find a lot of internal contradictions? No, there aren't. The books are generally, cohesive, they're non-contradictory. The characteristics of characters are the same. For example, Peter's the same at the beginning, at the end. He has issues all through, right? And all the other characters, right? So internally, the documents pass that test. And by the way, if they pass the bibliographical test, they're considered historical. If they pass the internal test, that just improves their history. What's the external test?
Outside.
External documents, and archaeology, and geographical. For example, the New Testament documents say that they occur where? The Levant. So, okay, was Jesus and those guys in the Levant? Aha! So it passes the geographical part of the external test. Get it? It purports to happen in the 1st century. Well, did it happen in the 1st century?
Ask Julius Caesar.
Well, yeah. All the people that we can trace archaeologically in other works, etc., it all happened in the 1st century. So therefore, what do we conclude? It's placed in chronologically, it's placed geographically. And, you know, when you talk about the external proof, you're also, what else could we compare?
Other writings of the period.
That's right, other writings of the period. And that's why in this class, for example, I will bring in often other writings. Although, you know, one thing that we could do very easily, and that's compare it to the other Gospels, right? Other documents in the period. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's another class. You see what I'm saying? Because in this class specifically, we're kind of looking at internal proof. So the big deal, and you know, the conclusion of, for example, the whole point is that how good a history do we think Matthew is?
Very good.
Very good, especially in antiquity. It's basically 10 times better. And, you know, historians know this. If there's a historian that doesn't know this, you should run.
It's common knowledge, we don't talk about it.
It's common knowledge, and by the way, I will tell you this. Why do you think we don't talk about this in our primary and secondary schools?
Politically, corrections.
Because if we talked about it, what would we have to acknowledge?
It's true in the church and state.
Well, the truth of the New Testament documents. The New Testament documents are great history. And there's no historian that, if you find a historian, you'll find all kinds of people that think they know a lot about stuff. I find them all the time on Facebook and wherever. They think they're so smart, you know, oh, you know, I know everything there is to know, you know, about the New Testament documents. You got atheists all over the place that say, you know, this and that and the other thing. And they have no knowledge at all. They don't have the most basic knowledge of how do you prove the historicity, the veracity of a document. You see what I'm saying? So like I said, if you run into a historian who doesn't know this, this is one of the great, you know, ways in a cocktail, you know, your cocktail things to tell if someone, it's like asking a person who's a sociologist if they know who Margaret Mead is, and they don't, or if they know who Green is, who basically disproved all of Margaret Mead's stuff. You know, these are like cocktail, you know, game busters that are really fun to play on people. So if you ask a historian about the historical legal tests, and they might use a different word. Sometimes it's called the legal historical. Sometimes it's called the witness method. Sometimes it's, you know, the bibliographical method. They might understand that. But if they don't understand the methods for knowing historical veracity, they're not good historians. That's the point. Now, let me talk quickly about the Mysterion. I've got a few minutes to talk about Mysterion. We translate this word as mystery, but it's not mystery. As a matter of fact, I didn't put you off. Wait, he's gone. Max is here. I didn't put him off, but I wanted to go through the evolution of religion. Anybody remember the evolution of religion? This is true of all religions except Judaism and Christianity. First stage, animism. Animism, there's a God in everything. God's in everything. So there's gods in anything that's moving, anything that has any kind of life or movement. So there's gods in it. What's the second step? Pantheonic. Why pantheonic paganism? Because pantheonic paganism, animism, it's paganism. There's gods in everything, you know, spirits in everything. Pantheonic paganism, now you start putting them in clumps. Like, you know, you got the god of war, the god of, you know, lightning, the god of the weather, the god of, you know, the oceans. And so you start seeing that. What causes people to become pantheonic pagans?
More knowledge of the world.
Literacy. These means that literacy. Literacy. When you become literate, guess what the Greeks did? They became literate, they became pantheonic pagan. Guess what happened when the what's the earliest group to become pantheonic pagans? The Egyptians. That's